Hi again. So I'm going to talk to you a tiny bit about my unit, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the activities I created that I really like, and then if I have more time at the end, I will talk more about the rest of my unit. The unit title is Inquiry at Crater Lake, an inquiry lesson for high school students, and this is a predominantly project-based learning theory unit, and the premise is that students will be working on a service learning project, and which is collecting woodpecker and fire data for Crater Lake, and then they will also be developing their own research projects and implementing those, and then analyzing their data, writing up their analysis and results, and then creating and doing a presentation at a research forum at the Visitor Center at Crater Lake. So that's the real short rundown. The 4 lessons are fire, Wildland Fire at Crater Lake, environmental justice and Crater Lake, native tribes at Crater Lake, past and present, and the pumice desert of Crater Lake. Of these, the pumice desert one is, the idea is that there are several ecology lessons as part of this unit, and all of them provide students with background information so that they can develop some hypotheses and make observations about these environments, and then eventually, if they want to do their research project there, they can. The pumice desert one, because it's very small and sensitive ecosystem, is not part of that, but it's a really cool place. That's part of why I wrote the activity for it. And then the environmental justice one really is a short introduction to the idea of environmental injustice, and the idea that people from marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by things like where parks are situated and landfills and polluting factories and things like that. And there's also the intent behind it is that they learn a little bit about the creation of the Park Service and how there was a lot of racist and classist policies in effect at the time of that. So poor people and people of color were not allowed access to national parks when they were first created. And so that has really skewed the demographics of visitors to this day. And so the idea is that students learn about that and that they understand why the demographics are what they are, and then create a poster encouraging resolution of these problems and encouraging visitors from various different demographics to attend or go to parks. And then the native tribes at Crater Lake has the students reading a paper about how the lake was sacred to several tribes and how their stories reflect accurately the eruption of Mount Mazama and the creation of Crater Lake, and that early white settlers had this weird perception that natives were afraid of the lake, when really it had to do with their reverence for the lake, and that reverence was really misconstrued as fear. And then so the students will learn a little bit about the Molalla and the Klamath tribe, which were the main 2 tribes that did hunting and gathering on the slopes of the Mount Mazama, and that also accessed and swam in the lake and things like that. So that's that. And then the other activity, the fire ecology activity, involves educating them about the fire triangle, the fire behavior triangle, and having them create a hypothesis about how stand density and topography influence fire behavior, and then they'll actually get to test that hypothesis with match forests, or matchstick forests. So first I'm going to talk about the fire triangle activity, and the students would be using modeling clay, brown for fuel, red for heat, and yellow for oxygen. I do not have modeling clay, so I am using what once were frozen blueberries that are now not because it's so hot out. So the idea is that, so this is fuel, this is oxygen, and this is heat. And you say, all right, so if we have fuel and heat and oxygen, so if we just have fuel, do we have a fire? No. If we just have oxygen, do we have a fire? No. And if we just have heat, do we have a fire? No. And then you say, oh, well, if we add a spark to just fuels, but there's no air in there, so if you were to light a candle in a vacuum, would there be a fire? No. If we add the oxygen back to that, would we then have a fire? Yes. So that is the fire triangle. The fire triangle, when all sides are connected, you know you have a fire. any one of these three things disappears from that equation and you no longer have a fire. So snuffing a candle out, adding water to a fire burning up all of its fuels. So if the fire triangle talks about what fire needs to burn, what do you think the fire behavior triangle measures? So the fire behavior triangle measures or represents the three things that we need to predict or attempt to predict fire behavior. So the three things that determine how fast a fire moves, how hot it burns, and how severe the fire is. So it's fire intensity is heat, fire severity is how much it kills. So like the fire triangle, fuels determine a lot about how a fire moves. So a really densely forested area is going to burn very different from a not densely forested area. So that's why these blueberries are kind of gross. So that is why ponderosa pine forests so frequently burned at low severities, because frequent fires removed a lot of the fuel from the systems, and so the fires just couldn't really go anywhere or do anything that's that extreme. So then you have fuels, and what's something else that affects fire behavior? Rain, wind, so like weather patterns. So if you have a lot of rain, the fire's probably not going to be burning very hot or fast. If it's really hot and windy, the fire is going to be ripping through the area, consuming everything in sight. And then you also have topography, which is sometimes a hard one for students to get. You can hint in ways that'll lead them to that conclusion, but a lot of times I find you kind of have to give that one away. Anyway, and you can talk about how in really mountainous areas, especially areas that are really narrow, fire tends to really just get sucked up of those chimneys and burns things really hot, burns them really fast, and that has to do with the preheating of fuels above the front line of the fire. So if you think about a candle, if you put your hands around a candle, it's not very hot. If you put your hands above a candle, it's really hot, and you can really feel that heat coming up off the candle. And so a fire burning in a landscape is the same way. The stuff right in front of the fire is not getting preheated very quickly. The stuff above the fire, so the convective heat, so radiative heat, convective heat, is preheating everything above the fire. So fire moves really fast up a slope and pretty slow down a slope because everything that would have been preheated is already dead or consumed by the fire. And then, so that's the fire triangle and fire behavior triangle. The other part of this activity is giving students modeling clay and a safety talk and matchsticks and an aluminum pan, and you have them make hypotheses about how stand density and topography will affect their fire. And then you give them the clay, you have them build their own landscape, put these matchsticks in, head up, however dense and wherever they want to on the slopes of their landscape. And then everybody goes to each group, and the group explains their hypothesis and what it is that they built and what they think they'll see. And then you have a stopwatch and give them a lighter and have them light that forest on fire and wherever it is that they think will help measure their hypothesis. And then they can measure how fast it took for the flames to go out and the proportion of trees that died. And then they can use that data or information to reflect back on their hypothesis and say, oh yeah, we were right. Really dense stands on a really steep slope, if the fire's going up, it burns really fast and very thoroughly. Or, conversely, a really dense stand on really flat ground burns maybe slower and less completely. And ideally, you see differences between all of them. So I don't think I have enough time to go into much detail on anything else, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.